hello again, Jeff Scott from Blackhawk Technical College. I'm going to be redoing the lecture for 152, 153, Mobile Web Development, iOS, and I'm going to be redoing the one for Chapter 3, Handling Basic User or Basic Interaction. Did this yesterday, and size-wise it looked like it taped, but there was nothing there when I went to play it. So I'm trying it again. Hopefully this will work. So, I'm on page 51, Handling Basic User Interaction. And what they say here basically is the last chapter where we did the simple Hello World program. It was fine, but there was no interactivity. All right, so in this chapter, the application is going to be a bit more complex. As you can see here on page 52, what we're going to have, this is our interface basically. And we're going to have two buttons here, one that's named left and one that's named right. Or left button, right button, whatever we're told to name them. I don't know. And when we click the left button, it'll say left button pressed. When we click the right button, as shown here, it'll say right button pressed. And we're going to use the same event handler to handle both buttons. So that's what's new in here. Plus, in the last program, all we had was a simple static label. Now we're going to have some interactivity, and what's in this label right here will change based on which button we click. So I'm going to do the first half of the chapter right now, or at least attempt to. And then hopefully this weekend do the last half of the chapter where we get into talking about auto layout. So the first thing they talk about in here is they say this is the first chapter in which we're going to have to write some code. So as they mention here, if you have an interest, you can go and look into the appendix of the book, which is the Swift Introduction to Swift. But they're going to jump right in, and so am I, and talk a little bit about the Model View Controller, or MVC, which is really the way most that Apple does most, or Mac, whatever you want to say, does most of their applications. So, as mentioned here on page 53, the MVC pattern divides all the program functionality into three different categories, those being the model. The model can be a class, it can be a database, it can be different things. But it's what holds the application's data. So it could be a file, it could be a spreadsheet, it could be all sorts of things. The view is what the user sees. All right, it's our UI view controller and everything that's inside of the controller. And the controller itself is, let's put it this way, the model and the view do not communicate directly with one another. Rather, they send messages to the controller, which is kind of a go-between. Now, the author here says that the controller is the code that binds together the model and the view. Okay, it has the application logic that decides how to handle user inputs. No problem with that definition at all. So the goal in MVC, as mentioned in the paragraph right underneath this, is to implement these three types of code and make them as distinct from one another as possible. That way, anytime that you change anything, all right, so anytime that you come in there and change anything to the model, it should ideally not affect the view or the controller. And the same with changing any one of the ones shouldn't change the other two. All right. Ideally, Model View Controller helps ensure maximum reusability. As it says here, a class that implements a generic button can be used in any application. Okay. So they mention here about halfway down or so on the page, it says your model here is going to be created. We're going to create the model in this chapter by writing Swift classes to hold the app's data, or by building the model. Now, core data, as they mention here, we learned about in Chapter 13, so it'll be a while before we get into that. All right, and they mention here, as we dig deeper into Cocoa Touch, you will quickly start to see how the classes of the UI Kit framework follow the Model View Controller principles. So, we are going to start creating the project, so I'm going to bounce back and forth between here and Xcode, which I had at least had up running. Well, for some reason looks like it stopped running, but that's okay. I'm going to create a new Xcode project. I already have one that's called Button Fun, which is what we're supposed to call this, and that's shown in the book on page 54. So I've got the infamous button. In fact, I don't think I have one that's called Button Space Fun, but just in case, I'll call it Button Fun too. And I'm just going to save it onto my desktop, tell it to create. If you hear any noise in the background, somebody upstairs is showering. And my dog is running back and forth doing laps. So, all right. So looking at the view controller. So let's do that first. So we will bring up viewcontroller.swift right here. And what we get in viewcontroller.swift is a kind of a little template with two different functions in there that in this program at least we're not even going to use. All right. And the first one is Viewdidload, and in many ways Viewdidload is kind of like a controller, because as you can see with the comment that's right there, do any additional setup after loading the view, typically from a nib or from a storyboard. Then we've got did receive memory warning. All right. If we have anything that we have to do that's going to involve memory. Now, what the author will want us to do in just a minute, and I'm going to do it right now, is to remove everything that's in here. So we just have this. All right, so let's take a look at what's left there. The stuff in green in lines 1 through 7, comments, that's fine. Line 8, line 10, line 13, 15, and 16 blanks, that's fine. So we're importing UI kit, which is going to, again, give us the functionality we need. Import, again, is very similar to importing a Java program or using in a C# program, etc. Or as we just started talking about, like namespacing with PHP. So you've got here class viewController : UI viewController, which means that viewController is a subclass of UI viewController. All right, by subclassing it, we get a lot of the functionality from the UI viewController for free, so to speak. So before we jump on and go much further, let's go back to the book again, because in the book, starting on page 56, they talk about understanding outlets and actions. And again, I've gone through this in class several times. I will continue to go through this because ideally, at least, ideally, this will become so second nature to you that you won't have to think about it. They mention here in Chapter 2, you use the interface builder to design a simple user interface. A moment ago, we saw the shell of the code for the viewController class. It says there must be some way to link these objects to this, in the storyboard to the code. And they say, of course you can, and that's why you use outlets. Again, they mention here, it says, think of an outlet as a pointer. Well, think of an outlet as a pointer in the figurative sense, not in the literal sense, because Swift does not support pointers. All right, so it says it points to an object within the user interface. For instance, it says, suppose you build a text label like we did in Chapter 2, and you want to change the text from within the code. By declaring an outlet and then connecting that to a label object, you'll be able to do just that. All right. Now, when you think outlet, so an IB outlet, and again, this is my words. I haven't seen these exactly in a book, but when you think about an outlet, think about something that's passive, something that will react but won't act on its own. When you want to act on its own, kind of the opposite of that is what, as they mention here now towards the top of the screen that you see, is an action method or an action. Typically, you'll associate an action method with something like a button. So when you click the button, you'll want something to happen. All right. So as mentioned here, Xcode supports multiple ways of creating outlets and actions. We're going to see some of them in this chapter. All right. Now, some very important stuff on the bottom of page 56 here, and it goes on to the next page, but I just want to quickly go over a little bit of it. All right. And again, read it again, reread it again, so until it hopefully sinks in and starts to make some sense. It says outlets are ordinary Swift properties tagged with a decoration IB outlet. So when we look at this line right here, that's in blue, and we start breaking it down a little bit at a time, this says that this is an interface builder variable. It's an outlet variable, not an action variable, so again, it will be reacting to something that happens. It's weak, meaning that we're going to let the system control our resources, our memory. We're going to use ARC, automatic resource counting. Okay, it is a variable, so it's var. The name of the variable is my button, and my button is of type UI button. And we'll get to the exclamation point in just a minute. It says the Swift compiler doesn't do anything special when it sees the IB outlet decoration. Its sole, wait here, come on. Oh boy. I'm still getting used to using a Mac. Sorry. All right. Its sole purpose, as mentioned here, is to act as a hint to Xcode that this is a property that we're going to connect to a storyboard or a nib file. All right. Then on the bottom of page 56 and going on to page 57, it says, you may be wondering why the declaration for my property, the my button property, ends with an exclamation point. This is the key stuff. The sentence, 2 sentences on the bottom of page 56 that go up to the top of the next page. Swift requires that all properties must be fully initialized before the completion of every initializer, unless the property is declared as optional. All right. When a view controller is loaded from the storyboard, the outlet properties are set from the information saved in the storyboard. But fortunately or unfortunately, as it says here, this happens after the view's initializer has been run. So unless you give variables dummy values, outlet properties have to be optional. And it gives you 2 ways of declaring them. The question mark and the colon. All right. And I'm sure, and I probably should have done this previously, I'm sure that you can go out to Stack Overflow or even just out to Google and put in UI button question mark versus UI button exclamation point Swift and get something. If I have time, before I finish this up, I'll try to do that. In fact, why don't we just do that right now? As I said, I'm still getting used to using a Mac myself. I know that many of you, when you talked about it, you say that you're unfamiliar with it and you don't like this or you don't like that. Again, to me, that it's not that it's bad, so to speak. It's just different. All right. So let's see if we get something by putting in what I just mentioned to you. So UI button exclamation point versus UI button question mark. All right. UI button reference. Creating buttons. Oh, there's a boatload of stuff in here, but I'd have to search through that, so I'm not going to find that. Find it there. How about this? Try this. I'm going to say implicitly unwrapping. How about that? Implicitly unwrapped optional. That looks good. All right. Why create implicitly unwrapped optionals in Stack Overflow? So let's see what that says. All right. It says, again, why would you want to implicitly create an implicitly unwrapped optional versus creating just a regular variable or constant? All right. And they give an example. It says, why is this going to be more useful than this? All right. And they mention there, if optionals indicate that a constant or a variable is allowed to have no value, but sometimes it's clear from the program that we'll always have a value after that value is first set. All right, so let's take a look at. It says, consider the case of an object that may have nil properties while it's being constructed and configured, but is immutable and non-nil afterwards. All right, implicitly unwrapped optionals would clean up its code a good deal with relatively low loss of safety. All right, in other words, it would be safe. And one of the things that we have talked about, and I've tried to impress upon you, is the fact that Swift is a safe programming language. It tries to make sure that it always is kept in a safe state. All right, and they talk about when to use them for a constant, etc. And so there's a bunch of stuff in here. And some of the related stuff too, how to use implicitly unwanted optionals, etc. So again, that was from Stack Overflow. All right. And all I did was look up. So you can type in Stack Overflow, why create implicitly unwrapped optionals, if you don't like my explanation. Okay. All right. All right, actions. Middle of page 57. In a nutshell, actions are methods that are tagged with a decoration IB action. So they're associated with a function, which is a method, which means that you want to do something, all right, when that takes place. Now, normally they'll look something like this. And there'll be a sender, which you may or may not even use. And if you don't use it, it won't hurt anything. Okay? So on the next page here, this is where they actually told us to come in and clean up the view controller. Oops, sorry. So on page 58, I think it's in here, yeah, cleaning up view controller. This is where they ask you to come in and remove the low memory warning and the view controller did load. So, oh boy, look at this. So I've done that. How's that? That's what mine looks like right now. So they say let's design the interface. And I'm going to follow the steps as they're shown here in the book. So they mention on page 59 that what we're about to do is add 2 buttons and a label. Again, that's going to be our interface. Right now, if I go to the storyboard, it's empty. There's nothing in there. So we're about to change that. All right, again, in a matter of moments, we're going to change that. Why that keeps happening? So as mentioned here on the bottom of page 59, we're going to add 2 buttons and a label to our interface. The buttons will each need to trigger an action method, in this case the same action method. We could, as mentioned here, have 2 different methods, but since we're doing essentially the same thing, we're going to do it as one. So they mention on the bottom of page 59, the author says, let's add the buttons first and then place the label. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to add the buttons and the action method right now. So I'm on the bottom of page 59 and going on. So it says our first order of business is to add 2 buttons to the user interface. We'll then have Xcode create an empty action method for us and we'll connect both buttons to it. Any code that we place in that method will be executed when the user taps one of the buttons. All right, so let's jump back into Xcode. And the author says here, let's bring up the object library. In fact, let's first bring up our storyboard. And once we've brought up the storyboard, a couple things. First of all, we're not going to need our navigation area over here, so we can remove that. Second, we do want to bring up the assistant editor here. All right. It'll all come up in just a second. All right, looking good. So if they say drag a button and drop it on the white window inside of the editing area. Well, so I want to come over here and type in, you probably know this already, I can type in button or UI button, and you really only need the first 4 letters. So if I type in U-I-B-U, there it is. Okay, not that that's a big thing, but just so you knew it. So let's drag this in, and they want us to place it pretty close, somewhere around there. All right, might not be perfect, but it's fine. Double click on it, and let's change the name, not the name, but let's change the code in there to left. Okay, now we've got it butted up against there, that's good. So I've done everything that they've asked us to do here that's on page 60 of the book. All right, and really the stuff that's on page 61 also. So now I want to wire this up. So in other words, my button's already highlighted, so I want to hold down on the control key, click on the mouse pad, and drag over to here and let go. All right. What this does is it allows me to bring up this pop-up menu that's called Connection. All right. And the first thing that we want to do, and in fact all the stuff we want to do is shown in the book here on page 63. All right. We want to change this from outlet, and I'm going to change it in a second from outlet to action. But notice right now under outlet, it's got outlet, and then it's got object view controller, name, type, and storage. The reason I'm telling you that is when I change it to action, what's there changes a little bit because it also gives us events and arguments, which we didn't have previously. All right. So we are supposed to call this, I think it was left button, but I don't remember. Oh, sorry, no, you're right. It's button pressed. This is what we want to have fire. So this is button pressed. And the other thing is, if we leave this at any object, that's okay. The program will run, but as explained on page 64 in the book, the offshoot or the offside of doing it that way is the fact that now technically you're saying that any control would be able to call this routine, this method. Well, we only want buttons to call it, so where the any object is, I'm going to click on the down arrow and I'm going to choose UI button. All right. So it provides a little bit of validation checking for me. All right. Then there's a couple other fields here. Touch up inside is the one, it's the method that fires when the user lifts his or her finger off the screen and if their finger is still on the button. So it's kind of like a click event. And the arguments allows you to choose between 3 different arguments. In fact, notice that the touch up inside, there's a lot of different things we can choose from in here. Those are all the methods associated with our button. These are the 3 possibilities. No arguments, sender and event. We'll just leave it set to the default that we have right here and we'll click connect. And you'll notice it's starting now to put in, it put the method definition in here for us. And that's good. That's what we wanted to have happen. Now we're going to want to create one more button. So again, I'm going to come down here and I'm going to create a button and I'm going to try to line it up with the other one so you can see how it is pretty much lined up. All right, and I'm going to move this over a little bit because they ask you to put it way on the right side. So drag this over. It's pretty good. Again, double click on it, change the heading on the button to right. All right, that looks pretty good. And I want to do the same exact thing that I did before. In other words, I'm going to want to drag that over. Now, I think it was Anders who asked in class the other day, but just so you know, because they do mention this as a tip on the bottom of page 64. So I'm going to remove the button for right now, and I'm going to recreate it. One way that you can create another button on here is, they mention this tip on the bottom of page 64 in the book. It says instead of dragging out a new object from the library, you can hold down on the Option key, which is the key like the Alt key. It's between the Control and the Command, all right, and drag the original one. So if I drag, notice what happens. Okay, so it's creating a copy of it. There it is. I want to double click on that again and change it to right. Okay, double check and make sure that it's still lined up pretty good. That's good. All right. Then I want to go and now I want to wire up the button the same way we did before. Notice when I click Control and I hold down and I drag over to here, I get a connect action. And as soon as I let go, now what I've just done is I've told the system I want either one of these buttons, when clicked, to both respond to the button pressed. All right, and that's shown visually is in figure 310 on page 65. All right, so we built 2/3 of our interface, and what's left is to change or add our label and the outlet to the label. So right now all I'm showing in here is UI button, and again I can type in LABE and there's label. Okay, and they tell you to kind of take it and put it somewhat in the middle. All right, so that's not too bad. Then they tell you to basically make it about as wide on each end as you can. So there's one, there's the other, and we're also told that we're supposed to go into the alignment here and make it center aligned. All right, and that's everything basically that's in the book on page 66. The center alignment is shown in the attributes inspector, which you see here, which you bring up from right here. All right, and they say that we don't want the text that's in here. Now notice that once I remove the text, boom, and I get off of here, okay, it may or may not be hard to tell that I've got a control here. Well, I've already done something that, because I did it before, but they say if you've got invisible elements like empty labels and you want to be able to see them, then go over to Editor, Canvas, and make sure that under Editor Canvas that the Show Bounds, the Show Bounds rectangles is checked. Notice if I uncheck it, how that disappears. It's still there, see? But it doesn't show. But if I come back again and do an editor, canvas, show bounds rectangles, now it's back. All right? So all that's left to do is to create an outlet for the label. And as mentioned, we're going to do this the same way we just did it for the buttons. But again, we're creating an outlet this time and not an action. So I'm going to take my mouse again, click to highlight it, control, click, come on, click on it to highlight it, control, drag over, just like we did before, and I'm going to drag it right there. All right. And the pop-up window that we get is similar to the one we saw before, but notice now if I click here, it shows outlets and outlet collection. A collection is kind of like an array of outlets, so just don't worry about that for now. But notice there's no action there because, again, the label is an inactive control. It's more a passive control. So what we want to do here is under the name of this, we want to change it to status label. All right, same exact thing they're showing in the book here on page 68. All right, so it says leave the type field set to status label, leave everything else basically for right now as it is. Hit return or connect to put in your changes, and that's what we've added now. All right, so now we have an outlet, and Xcode has connected the label to the outlet, meaning that if we make any changes to the status label in code, they will be affected in the label itself, and that's what we want to do. We want to change that text. We're going to do that shortly. All right, put some code in here real quickly into our action method, and I'm going to put in the same code that's shown on the bottom of page 69 in the text. Let title equals sender dot title for state dot normal. Okay, so that's the first one. Try to make this a little wider so we can see all of it on the line. There we go. All right. Next, let plain text equal, and we're going to want to print out the value of that title. Remember, to do that, we need a backslash, and then we need to put the variable name that we just created, title, inside of parentheses, button pressed. So again, that's going to end up saying either left button pressed or right button pressed in just a minute. All right, so that's the code that's shown on the bottom of page 69 in the book. The first line that we have here, this line as it says on the top of page 70, it retrieves the tap button's title using sender. All right, then we're going to say that title, so which is left or right, so we're going to say left button pressed or right button pressed. And then this one just basically says we're not going to be doing anything special here as far as the formatting for it. We will do that later. So I'm going to do a file save, and I'm going to run it. And when I run it, after it comes up on the screen, then I'm just going to stop for this part of the presentation and then pick it up again a little bit later on the middle of page 71 when we talk about auto layout. Again, looks so far so good. Everything's been saved. And again, what they do for the rest of the chapter, starting on page 71, is they show how to lay this out, because as you'll see when we run this, it's going to look a little funky. All right, so what we'll do is on pages 71 through the middle of page 83, we'll talk about how to use auto layout to make it look better. Then on the bottom of page 83, I should say. Then on the bottom of page 83, all of 84 and all of 85, which ends the chapter, we will talk about we will then talk about using app delegate and some of the other stuff that's in there. So I'm waiting for this simulator to come up. Not sure right now why it's not showing, but it's not. a lot of reasons that I don't like to work from home with these tapes, but the main one is just there are some noises going on in the background, and but sometimes you got to do what you got to do, right? Ideally, when this comes up, it's going to look something like what you see in the book on page 71 on the top half of the page. Running the application, the layout needs to be fixed. All right, again, I typically have problems when I first start running the simulator, and I should have started it up before, and I didn't. But I've got to quit it, usually, and then start it up again. And usually when I start it up again, yeah, it runs a little bit better. We'll see. Again, this will, as soon as this comes up, and I can show it to you that what we've done so far, all right, as soon as that comes up, then we'll be finished for right now. Again, it's going to look a little funky. It may not even look like it does on the screen because I'm not sure exactly what device it was set for on the simulator in the book. So again, here's our splash screen, button fun 2, okay. And ideally this is going to come off in just a minute. There's the left button. And again, you don't even see where it says left button pressed. I'm going to have to try to move this. If I click it, I don't know if we're going to see any of it or not, but it should be there right now. All right, so I'm going to stop right now. So I'm going to stop the simulator, and I'm going to stop taping right now, and I'm going to pick it up again later on the bottom of page 71 talking about auto layout. So for right now, I'm going to do a file save. I'm going to do a file close project. I'm going to do an X code. Well, I guess it kicked me out anyway. Still has my simulator running though. Okay, so I've gotten, like I said, I am now up to the middle of page 71. And there are about 85 pages in the chapter, so I've done about a little more than half of the chapter. We left off right here, and we're going to pick it up there where it says the left button is in its right place, but the label and the other button are not. We're going to fix that momentarily. All right, so again, ideally, why my simulator? All right. That should be it. Hopefully this will tape.